Thank you all for joining us today for Countering Extremism and Hate Speech in Gaming and Esports. My name is Lieutenant Sultan from Ministry of Interior of the United Arab Emirates. Before proceeding, I would like to introduce Major Hamad Khatar from the Ministry of Interior to say a few words.
Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone. I am Major Hamad, Director of International Operations and Ministry of Interior. And to give you maybe a perspective or a brief about the Security Committee Forum, heavily focused on countering violence extremism online, of which the gaming ecosystem is pivotal. Video games, especially multiplayer ones, are available today for everyone. Looking at this from a law enforcement perspective, I can see that these people who play, they can get a lot of benefits from building leadership, teamwork, but also have leave vulnerable population, especially children, open to hate speech, potential radicalization. As a law enforcement officers, researchers, technologists, or civil society members can be more empowered to secure this digital frontier and create a world where everyone can play safe. Thank you so much.
You can see by the title of my presentation, I call this the spectrum of extremism in online gaming, because it's not a one-size-fits-all thing. You know, you will see many things happening. You will see dedicated games produced by extremist groups. You see platforms that are just being exploited by extremist groups. And you'll see some other things that are happening, some elements of grooming, some elements of, people actually manipulating the scripts of very benign games to introduce extremist content. So that's why I call this a spectrum of extremism in online gaming. So the potential for grooming, does it exist? I think it does. And I think this is what is quite disturbing. I'll just basically just summarize with what else is out there. So yes, both jihadi groups and the far right, they've created their own specialized games and so on. So it's a case of radicalization going on within the gaming platforms, or you already have people who are already radicalized just coming into this echo chamber where they're just living out their fantasies and so on. There's so much out there. There's so many game platforms out there on Steam and so on. So what I'm trying to say is that grooming can take place in any popular game, and that's possible as well. What you see down there is that the vocabulary of the gaming culture has been used by jihadists, and they actually created what is known as a jihadi simulator. And at the end of the day, the fact that you can take someone, you can dehumanize them into something that is worth killing. This is my conclusion. Yes, it's very easy to start blaming these platforms, but look, if you have a pedophile who's basically coming into a swimming pool, what do you do then? You're going to close down the swimming pool? It's just platforms that are being exploited.
All games are connected somehow on the internet. All games are kind of multiplayer. Even single player games are connected through a platform. You can't really engage in the gaming space without being connected to the broader community. And having the presence of a shared activity being the foundation of these relationships does what we call in the research, it emotionally jumpstarts these relationships. So basically you learn to trust someone before you get to know them. Whereas in a traditional relationship, you get to know someone over time and then slowly learn if you can trust them. So if you're playing a game together and there's a common enemy and you help me kill the enemy, I immediately have a foundational level of trust with you, even though I know nothing about you. And this emotional jump starting of the relationships can create a foundation for strong, long-lasting friendship bonds. We see this in the research time and again, that friendships made in gaming spaces tend to form quicker and be closer than friendships formed on other spaces of the internet. Along with the fact that they're unique social environments, the game itself kind of socially reinforces gameplay. But we do know that most people play for social community. If you ask people why they're playing, social motivations for play are pretty ubiquitous. So we also have this other element. And as I mentioned, the friendships become close and tight-knit, and we find they become primary sources of social and emotional support. And we asked about anti-government, anti-LGBTQ hate, Islamism, misogyny, racism, and white nationalism. And just to give you an example, anti-LGBTQ hate, 75% of people said they had directly witnessed it, and the vast majority had been witnessed directly in a game platform. And that means not a third-party game adjacent space like a Discord or a Twitch or Steam. 75% racism, 75% misogyny, 60% white nationalism, and 30% anti-government, which seemed very, very high. 60% white nationalism, that means 60%, if you think about it at scale, the 3 billion players are in some way exposed to these ideas or these ideologies at some point when they're in gaming spaces. So yes, I agree that gaming makers are not responsible directly for the individual ways that people are using their spaces, but they are responsible for the spaces they create.
There's no doubt that gaming platforms are an important part of this picture, and also in some ways an even bigger challenge in terms of having to manage and police live audio conversation and behavior, which, unlike social media platforms, is secondary to the primary purpose of the platform. In gaming, the game is the primary purpose and the socialization is sort of layered on top of that. In other social media, it's the primary purpose is the communication and content exchange.
Just stressing a couple of key points from the industry, they may be relevant for today's discussion. This was highlighted earlier that gaming as a platform is very, very diverse. Some games, there's no two games are quite alike, and some create more fertile grounds for extremism or radicalization due to its design, its features, and the way that it facilitates conversations and relationships.
So we think about it borrowing a model from some of the work around genocide and extremism in much more dire adjacency spaces. But we've been looking at bystanders, perpetrators, and victims as a three-part sort of kind of thinking of it like a three-legged stool. I'm not a big believer that there's one small group of hate people online in games that if you simply excise them, then we've dealt with the problem. After having studied toxicity and social emotional regulation in games for quite some time, including esports, what you start to see is that there's a lot of garden variety toxicity and extremism happening when people lose their temper because they lose a match or a teammate isn't performing well. And then you have these sudden spikes of hate speech, spikes of statements that are intended to be harmful and hurtful, and to have a function to shut down not only other players, but the game and the team itself. So when you look at these kind of variables around online gameplay, does it cause or normalize extremism? What you see is a very sort of mixed profile. We found that in terms of the amount of gameplay per week, we do see that the more you game per week, the more likely you are to laugh at extremism or to turn around and be toxic in return. 95% perpetrators of anti-Semitic extremist hate behaviors are 95% more likely to have been exposed to just that kind of discrimination and hate-based language and behavior in the past. And so what you start to see is what I think we probably, I think we kind of know intuitively that, that abuse begets abuse, that hate behavior ends up perpetuating more hate behavior. And I think that that's part of the pattern that you see. So if we step back and look at the data, what we're looking at, you see that while you can't say that necessarily amount of gameplay per week or length of gameplay is less clearly associated with extremism, what you do see is that exposure to extremism ends up perpetuating and normalizing extremism and increasing the likelihood of those who are exposed later being perpetrators.